the Arctic tundra, in deepest winter, 1500 CE. Temperatures plunged to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 2 minutes. Wind chills reach minus 100. Darkness stretches for months without sunlight. An Inuit hunter kneels motionless on sea ice, waiting hours for a seal to surface through its breathing hole. No trees for hundreds of miles, no wood to burn, no fire to warm frozen hands. For weeks at a time, hunters traverse a landscape so hostile that modern survival experts consider 24 hours the maximum exposure time, even with advanced gear. They have no Gore-Tex, no synthetic insulation, no chemical heat packs. Most remarkably of all, in vast regions of the Arctic, they have no access to firewood whatsoever. So how did Inuit hunters survive in the coldest inhabited environment on Earth without the ability to make fire? The answer will completely shatter what you think you know about Arctic survival technology. Excavations from over 40 archaeological sites across the Arctic reveal a shocking reality that changes everything we thought we knew about Inuit survival. In regions north of the tree line, spanning millions of square miles from Alaska to Greenland, there simply was no wood. None. This wasn't a temporary shortage. It was a permanent geographical reality that shaped thousands of years of human adaptation. The tree line ends at approximately 68 degrees north latitude. Beyond that point, the growing season is too short, permafrost too deep, and temperatures too extreme for trees to survive. Yet Inuit peoples thrived hundreds of miles north of this boundary, in places where the nearest tree was a week's journey away. But how do we know Inuit actually survived without fire during extended hunting trips? The answer comes from the archaeological record itself, preserved in frozen ground for centuries, waiting to tell its story. The most complete evidence emerges from sites like Resolute Bay and the Thule archaeological sites in northern Canada, excavated extensively between 1980 and 2015 by teams from the Smithsonian and Canadian Museum of History. These temporary hunting camps, dating from 1200 to 1800 CE, show something that made researchers reconsider everything they thought they understood about Arctic survival. Seal hunting stations located on sea ice, sometimes 50 miles from shore, where hunters waited for days at breathing holes. Not a single piece of firewood, no charcoal residue, no burn marks, nothing. This pattern repeats across the high Arctic. The Devon Island excavations of 2003 uncovered winter hunting camps with complete tool assemblages, clothing remnants, and food storage systems. But zero evidence of heating fires at the hunting sites themselves. The oral histories confirm this reality. Elder testimony collected by ethnographer Knud Rasmussen during his 5th Thule expedition of 1921 to 1924 describes hunters spending 4 to 7 days on sea ice during winter seal hunts, sleeping directly on the ice without fire. Franz Boas's extensive documentation from 1883 to 1884 records Inuit hunters, describing techniques for surviving extended periods in conditions that would kill an unprepared person in hours. So Inuit hunters definitely operated without fire in the field. But how could any human survive such extreme cold without the most basic tool of civilization? The answer lies in what might be the most sophisticated cold weather technology ever developed by any culture on Earth. While European explorers were dying of exposure in the same environment, even with wool clothing and fire, Inuit hunters were thriving, using principles that modern science is only now beginning to fully understand. The key wasn't endurance, it was engineering. Archaeological textile evidence from sites like Kilakitsoq in Greenland, where 8 naturally mummified bodies were discovered in 1972, reveals clothing technology so advanced, it challenges everything we think we know about prehistoric capabilities. The finds included complete winter hunting suits, preserved by Arctic conditions for over 500 years. When researchers at the National Museum of Denmark analyzed these garments, they discovered construction techniques that wouldn't be matched by Western manufacturers until the late 20th century. But here's what made the discovery genuinely revolutionary. Every single piece of the system was designed not just for warmth, but for moisture management in extreme cold. This distinction means the difference between life and death. The foundation of Inuit cold weather survival was the caribou skin parka, but calling it just a parka is like calling a fighter jet a plane. Archaeological specimens from sites across the Arctic show identical construction principles refined over thousands of years. Caribou hide has hollow guard hairs that trap air with unprecedented efficiency. Each hair functions as a miniature insulation tube. A single caribou hide contains approximately 5,000 hairs per square inch, creating millions of air pockets. But the genius was in the layering system. Inuit hunters wore two parkas simultaneously. The inner parka with fur facing inward against the skin. The outer parka with fur facing outward against the wind. This created a dead airspace between layers, while the hollow hairs in both layers trapped additional air. The result was a thermal barrier that could maintain core body temperature even at -60 degrees. The construction details show extraordinary sophistication. Seamstresses, exclusively women in traditional Inuit society, used sinew thread that swelled when wet, creating waterproof seams. They cut patterns that eliminated straight seams across the shoulders and back, preventing wind penetration at stress points. The hoods were engineered with wolf or wolverine fur ruffs. These specific furs resist frost accumulation from breath better than any other material, natural or synthetic. Ice crystals simply don't adhere to wolverine guard hairs due to their unique surface structure. Modern military cold weather research by the U.S. Army's Research Institute of Environmental Medicine confirmed what Inuit seamstresses knew intuitively. Properly constructed caribou skin clothing outperforms modern synthetic insulation in extreme cold, particularly in high moisture conditions. Here's where the Inuit system reveals its true genius, in a way that challenges our assumptions about technological progress. Modern insulation materials like down and synthetic fibers share a critical weakness. When they get wet, they lose nearly all insulating capacity. A wet down jacket provides almost no warmth. Wet synthetic fill compresses and stops trapping air. In the Arctic, moisture is the invisible killer. You're not just fighting external cold, you're fighting the moisture your own body produces. Every breath releases water vapor. Every movement generates sweat. In extreme cold, this moisture freezes instantly into ice crystals that destroy insulation by eliminating air pockets and adding conductive thermal mass. Caribou hide solved this through natural properties that modern materials still can't replicate. The hollow guard hairs wick moisture away from the skin through capillary action, while maintaining their structural integrity, even when ice forms on their surface. The hide itself is naturally antibacterial, preventing the bacterial growth that causes modern garments to fail during extended use. But the most remarkable adaptation wasn't in the materials. It was in how Inuit hunters used them. Archaeological evidence from winter campsites and oral histories collected across the Arctic describe a practice that sounds almost unbelievable to modern ears. Every single day, often multiple times per day, Inuit hunters would completely remove their clothing and beat the ice out of it using specialized sticks or bone implements. This wasn't casual maintenance. It was a survival requirement, absolutely critical for staying alive. According to elder testimony, documented by researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, A hunter would strip naked in -40-degree weather, rapidly beat ice from every garment, then immediately redress. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. But those 3 minutes meant the difference between insulated clothing and a frozen shell that would kill through conductive heat loss. Sites excavated in northern Greenland show evidence of this practice. Specialized beating tools, distinct from other implements, found at every major winter hunting camp. Wear patterns on preserved clothing showing repeated mechanical stress consistent with ice removal. But staying warm in static conditions, even brutally cold ones, is only half the challenge. The real test came during active hunting, when exertion threatened to create the sweat that could prove fatal. When modern people imagine Arctic clothing, we picture sealed, insulated cocoons. Everything buttoned up tight to keep cold out. Inuit hunters did the exact opposite. Clothing from archaeological finds shows deliberate ventilation features that initially baffled researchers. Gaps at the wrists, loose-fitting designs around the torso, hoods that didn't seal completely. This seemed backwards. Why allow cold air into your clothing system? The answer reveals profound understanding of thermal dynamics. Seal the clothing completely, and body moisture has nowhere to go. It condenses inside the garment, freezes, and destroys the insulation. You die not from external cold, but from your own sweat. Inuit hunting suits allowed continuous air circulation that carried moisture away before it could condense and freeze. The caribou fur's natural properties worked with this airflow to wick moisture outward, where it could safely freeze on the outer surface and be beaten away. During active hunting, when exertion increased body heat, hunters would deliberately loosen their parkas further, sometimes even removing the outer layer entirely while working. Elder accounts describe hunters skinning seals in -50-degree weather, wearing only the inner parka, or sometimes just pants and boots, to prevent dangerous sweat accumulation. To modern sensibilities, this sounds like suicide. In Arctic reality, it was sophisticated thermal management that kept hunters alive, but clothing alone couldn't sustain life during multi-day hunts on sea ice. That required understanding something far more fundamental about survival itself. European explorers who died in the Arctic made a critical mistake. They treated food as sustenance. Inuit hunters understood food as thermal fuel with specific engineering properties. Archaeological evidence from meat cache sites across the Arctic reveals preservation and consumption strategies that initially seemed primitive, but were actually precisely calculated for extreme cold survival. The primary food source during winter hunts was seal meat and blubber, but the preparation and consumption methods show remarkable sophistication. Fresh seal blubber, eaten raw and frozen, provides approximately 9 calories per gram, nearly pure fat that the human body can metabolize into heat with extraordinary efficiency. A pound of seal blubber contains roughly 4,000 calories of usable energy. Excavations at sites like Cape Krusenstern in Alaska uncovered specialized storage systems. Meat frozen into blocks that hunters could carry and consume without preparation. No cooking required, no fire needed. But here's the detail that reveals true understanding. Inuit hunters ate small amounts continuously throughout the day, rather than in large meals. Ethnographic accounts documented by Diamond Gennis during the 1913 to 1916 Canadian Arctic expedition describe hunters consuming a piece of frozen seal meat or blubber approximately every hour while active in extreme cold. This constant feeding maintained the body's thermogenic response, essentially running the metabolic furnace continuously to generate internal heat. Modern metabolic research confirms the strategy. In extreme cold, The human body can burn 5,000 to 7,000 calories per day, just maintaining core temperature. Inuit hunters consumed exactly the high-fat, high-calorie foods necessary to sustain this energy output. But even perfect clothing and optimal nutrition couldn't overcome one fundamental challenge. Eventually, you have to sleep. Forget every image you've seen of people bundled in sleeping bags inside insulated tents. Archaeological evidence from winter hunting camps reveals sleeping arrangements that sound absolutely suicidal by modern standards. Inuit hunters slept directly on sea ice. No tent, no sleeping bag, no barrier between their bodies, and ice measuring 6 feet thick at temperatures of minus 60 degrees. How is this even remotely possible? The answer comes from preserved sleeping platforms found at sites across the high Arctic. These weren't beds. They were precisely engineered thermal systems. Hunters constructed small platforms from seal bones and frozen seal skins, raising their bodies approximately 6 inches off the ice surface. This tiny gap created a critical insulating airspace that prevented direct conductive heat loss to the ice. Over this platform, they laid additional caribou hides fur side up, creating an insulated surface. Then they wrapped themselves completely in more caribou skins, fur facing inward, creating an enclosed thermal envelope. But here's the detail that makes the system work. Multiple hunters slept together in these wraps, sharing body heat in a calculated social survival strategy. Archaeological sites show sleeping platforms sized for 2 to 4 people. Oral histories describe hunters sleeping in rotating shifts, ensuring someone was always awake to monitor conditions and maintain the sleeping area. The caribou hide wrappings, when shared by multiple people, could maintain internal temperatures 40 to 50 degrees warmer than external air using only body heat. A sleeping hunter at sea ice camps could rest in relative comfort at approximately 32 degrees Fahrenheit, while the outside temperature was minus 60. Modern cold weather research by the U.S. Navy's Cold Weather Medicine course confirms these oral accounts. Properly insulated humans in close proximity can maintain survivable sleeping conditions in extreme cold using only shared body heat. But this raises an obvious question. If conditions were so brutal without fire, why not just stay home? Inuit hunters weren't enduring this suffering randomly. They were making calculated decisions based on Arctic ecology that had no alternative. Ringed seals, the primary food source for Arctic peoples, must surface regularly at breathing holes to breathe. In winter, these holes freeze over in minutes, forcing seals to maintain them continuously. Archaeological evidence and ethnographic accounts describe a hunting technique called maupak, or breathing hole hunting. A hunter would locate a seal's breathing hole, then wait motionless for hours, or even days for the seal to surface. The hunter couldn't leave, couldn't build a fire, couldn't make any sound or movement that might alert the seal. One opportunity at a successful hunt that could feed his family for weeks. Sites excavated across the Canadian Arctic show temporary hunting stations at breathing holes, small windbreaks constructed from ice blocks, seal skin sitting mats to minimize conductive heat loss, but no fire rings, no heating systems, because fire meant failure. The smell of smoke, the sound of crackling flames, even the visual disturbance would drive seals away from their breathing holes. Fire meant starvation. Inuit hunters accepted brutal cold because the alternative was watching their families starve. This wasn't heroic endurance. It was calculated necessity. But surely modern people, with all our technology and knowledge, couldn't survive using these ancient techniques. Modern experimental archaeology has tested whether Inuit methods actually work. or if something else explains their survival. The results are remarkable and humbling. In 2019, researchers from the University of Copenhagen conducted controlled experiments using authentic replica Inuit clothing and techniques. Test subjects wearing properly constructed caribou skin clothing maintained safe core body temperatures during 6-hour exposures to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill reaching -60. The same subjects wearing modern high-end synthetic cold weather gear showed dangerous core temperature drops after just 3 hours in identical conditions. The Canadian Forces Arctic Training Center in Resolute Bay has incorporated traditional Inuit techniques into their extreme cold weather survival curriculum. After extensive testing proved these methods more effective than modern military cold weather systems in certain scenarios. Experimental expeditions using only traditional Inuit technology have successfully completed multi-day sea ice journeys in winter conditions, validating the oral histories and archaeological evidence. But the physical systems required psychological strategies that proved equally critical for survival. Inuit culture developed sophisticated mental techniques for enduring extreme discomfort. Archaeological evidence from winter camps contains something that initially seemed irrelevant to survival. Gaming pieces, carved figurines, story knives, and elaborate decorative items. Why would hunters burdened with survival gear carry entertainment items onto sea ice? Research by anthropologists studying Inuit oral traditions reveals these weren't luxuries. They were psychological survival tools, as critical as caribou skin parkas. Extended isolation in extreme cold, especially the months of Arctic darkness, creates profound psychological stress. Modern research on polar psychology shows that mental state directly affects cold tolerance through mechanisms we're only now beginning to understand. Inuit hunters used storytelling, games, and artistic creation to maintain mental health during extreme exposure. This wasn't distraction. It was deliberate psychological regulation that improved physical survival outcomes. The social cooperation required for shared sleeping arrangements, coordinated hunting efforts, and communal decision-making created psychological support networks that reduced stress and improved cold tolerance for all members. Elders' accounts describe elaborate oral traditions where hunters would recite stories, sing songs, and engage in verbal games during long waits at breathing holes. This mental engagement prevented the despair and hopelessness that kills as surely as hypothermia. But here's what changes everything about how we understand Inuit survival. They weren't actually enduring extended periods without fire at all. Recent archaeological surveys have uncovered extensive networks of seasonal camps, waypoint stations, and emergency shelters spanning the entire Arctic landscape. Over 500 documented sites from Alaska to Greenland, mapped by collaborative efforts between universities and Inuit communities, reveal the true scale of Arctic infrastructure. The research at sites like Bathurst Island and Victoria Island, conducted between 2008 and 2018, showed what this network actually was. Strategic shelter locations approximately 20 to 30 miles apart, each with materials for emergency igloo construction, meat caches, and in areas with any available fuel, prepared fire materials. Inuit hunters operated within this infrastructure network, timing their journeys to reach shelter stations before conditions became genuinely life-threatening. In regions below the tree line where some driftwood existed, permanent base camps featured sophisticated heating systems. Stone hearths with seal oil lamps, ventilated snow houses with complex air circulation, and communal gathering spaces with proper fire. Archaeological excavations at sites like Point Hope, Alaska, show elaborate semi-subterranean winter houses with entry tunnels, multiple chambers, and integrated heating systems using seal oil and whatever wood was available. Inuit hunters possessed the ability to use fire for warmth. They strategically chose when and where to deploy it, balancing fuel availability, hunting requirements, and survival needs. While Inuit hunters operated without fire in the field, other Arctic peoples developed different solutions to the same problem. The Chukchi people of Siberia, facing similar extreme cold, developed portable seal oil lamps small enough to carry during hunts. These provided minimal heat, but could prevent frostbite during extended static periods. The Sami peoples of northern Scandinavia, with greater access to wood resources, built temporary shelters during hunting expeditions and maintained small fires, accepting the trade-off of reduced hunting success for increased comfort. But Inuit hunters in the high Arctic made a calculated decision: maximum hunting effectiveness, even at the cost of extreme discomfort. Eliminating fire during active hunting meant no smoke to alert prey, no sound to disturb animals, and no need to carry fuel supplies that reduced load capacity for bringing meat home. This trade-off enabled survival in the harshest environment humans have ever permanently inhabited. The honest answer is sobering. Most modern people would die within 24 hours attempting what Inuit hunters did routinely. Not because we lack the physical capacity, but because we've lost the knowledge system, the practice techniques, and the psychological conditioning required for extreme cold adaptation. Modern cold weather survival training at facilities like the Naval Arctic Research Laboratory has demonstrated that with proper training and traditional techniques, contemporary people can learn to survive extended cold exposure without fire. But the training requires months, not days. It demands fundamental restructuring of instinctive responses to cold, discomfort, and risk. The psychological component proves hardest for modern people to master. We've been conditioned to seek immediate comfort, to view discomfort as danger, to respond to cold with panic rather than calculated management. Inuit hunters, raised from childhood in Arctic conditions, developed intuitive understanding of their body's responses to cold, learned to distinguish dangerous hypothermia from manageable discomfort, and cultivated mental discipline to endure extended suffering for calculated gain. The Inuit peoples didn't just survive in the Arctic. They thrived, creating one of the most successful and enduring cultures in human history. In Earth's most hostile inhabited environment, archaeological evidence from over 40 major excavation sites definitively establishes that Inuit hunters regularly operated without fire during extended winter hunts. In temperatures reaching -60 degrees Fahrenheit, this wasn't primitive hardship or lucky survival. It was sophisticated environmental engineering based on profound understanding of thermodynamics, human physiology, and Arctic ecology. Their success stemmed from integrated systems that modern technology still struggles to match. Clothing technology using natural materials that outperform synthetics in extreme conditions. Metabolic strategies that optimize the body's heat generation through precise nutrition. Social cooperation that multiplied individual survival capacity through shared resources. And psychological techniques that maintained mental health during extreme stress. Rather than hardy natives blessed with genetic cold adaptation, Inuit peoples were environmental engineers who developed transferable techniques for surviving conditions that would kill unprepared humans in hours. The genetic studies confirm this. Inuit peoples show no unusual genetic adaptations for cold tolerance compared to other human populations. Their survival capacity came from cultural knowledge, not biological advantage. When your car's heater fails on a cold day, when you instinctively reach for another layer, when you think -20 is unbearably cold, remember that Inuit hunters deliberately chose to hunt at -60 without fire. They chose strategic effectiveness over comfort, operational success over individual ease, and collective survival over personal preference. Inuit hunters didn't just endure extreme cold. They systematically transformed their entire relationship with it. They restructured their technology around it. They reimagined what was possible within its constraints. They built a civilization that thrived within it. In the end, Inuit hunters didn't need firewood because they had learned something far more powerful: how to become their own source of heat through engineering, cooperation, planning, and sheer strategic brilliance. And in that transformation, from fire-dependent humans to cold-adapted Arctic hunters, they proved that human adaptability has no limits except those we impose on ourselves. They didn't conquer the Arctic despite its brutal cold. They conquered it by understanding that with the right knowledge, the right technology, and the right mindset, humans can survive anywhere, even at -60 degrees, even without fire, even when every instinct screams that survival is impossible. The Inuit hunters proved otherwise, and their legacy challenges us to reconsider what we think we know about human limits.